Franz Kafka is known as the creator of short stories and unfinished novels, in which he modeled a situation known as the Kafkaesque situation. Its essence lies in the conflict between an individual and a superior entity. However, I do not wish to analyze Kafka's works, but rather to talk about him, or rather about his death, which, in my opinion, surpassed all the nightmares he inflicted on his literary characters. In 1917, Kafka was diagnosed with pulmonary tuberculosis. Not only was food scarce during the war, but he also drank unpasteurized milk, which may have come from cows infected with tuberculosis. At that time, the disease was incurable. Treatment for the patient consisted of a specific diet and trips to sanatoriums. Kafka nearly died in 1918 when he contracted the deadly Spanish flu, which claimed over 20 million lives. Fortunately, he recovered at the Scalesen Sanatorium, a miracle, especially when a tuberculosis patient survives the Spanish flu. His tuberculosis worsened in 1920, and Kafka finally yielded to the persuasion of friends, deciding to stay at the Villa Tatra Sanatorium in Matlery. There, he also met the sick Robert Klopstock, who was studying medicine and was then 21 years old. However, Kafka, not fully recovered, returned to Prague. He experienced periods of good health and periods of worsening illness. On July 13, 1923, in the town of Müritz on the Baltic Sea, Dora Diamant met Franz Kafka. She was 25 at the time. Kafka was 40. Born to a Jewish family in Pabianite, she was raised in Benzin. She was a rebellious woman who ran away from home to care for orphans. She also studied Hebrew and tried performing in an amateur theater in Benzin. When she and Franz discussed Palestine, it turned out they both wanted to go there. It began with walks and conversations about Hebrew and ended with marriage plans. For her, Kafka did something extraordinary in September 1923. He abandoned his stable life in Prague and moved to Berlin, where inflation was rampant. Prices were rising by 20% daily, but customs were significantly relaxed, and no one paid any attention to the couple living together. Berlin had a population of almost 4 million at the time. They spent several months together, keeping to themselves and struggling to get by, even though they couldn't afford electricity and gas. However, Kafka's health deteriorated significantly. They had no money for the rising prices of food and medicine. So, with a heavy heart, Kafka returned to his family and then left for the Wienerwald Sanatorium. He weighed 54 kilograms at the time, standing 180 centimeters tall. Thus began his death. Kafka spent a week in Wienerwald, but his condition did not improve. When Dora arrived, seeing his emaciated body, she arranged for Franz to be examined at a Vienna clinic. It was a cold and rainy April when the appointment with Professor Hajek, a renowned specialist in lung diseases, fell. The sanatorium only had an open-top car in which Kafka was placed, wrapped in blankets, and Dora, standing in front of Franz the entire way, tried to shield his suffering body from the biting cold April sleet. The car dragged for 4 hours in the terrible weather, but Kafka did not complain. During the examination, it was revealed that the tuberculosis had also attacked his larynx, and Hajek gave him a maximum of 3 months to live. Dora didn't tell Franz this diagnosis. She didn't dare, fearing he would lose his remaining will to live. The woman in love hoped for a miracle. Kafka was fed up with the clinic, where he had to lie in the same room with dying patients whom no one except the priest cared about. However, they couldn't arrange an isolation ward for him. A distraught Dora wrote a plea for help to Robert Klopstock, who promised to come. Together with Felix Welch, they arranged a place for Kafka at the Hoffmann Sanatorium in Kierling, 15 kilometers from Vienna. Kafka, accompanied by Dora, rode the noisy metal elevator to the sanatorium's second floor. Kafka was admitted there on April 19, 1924, as patient 2557, which was the year 5684 according to the Jewish calendar. And wearing thick winter clothing and boots, Kafka weighed 49 kilograms. He was given a dream room with a view of the forest and mountains and a balcony where he could bask in the sun. The balcony was sunny from dawn until 2 p.m., and Kafka spent the entire time basking in the sun and writing. Sometimes he looked down at the garden where roses grew. Dora and Klopstock lived on the floor above, where there were rooms for patients' families. In the first few days of his stay, Kafka still felt strong enough to go for a walk around Kierling, and Dora arranged for a horse and a small carriage to take him around the area. However, his weakness quickly returned, and Kafka never left the sanatorium again. Dora traveled to Vienna, trying to arrange private appointments with specialists, but they demanded high fees. The weather deteriorated, with no sun and cold temperatures. This did not improve Kafka's condition. Franz's temperature fluctuated between 37 to 39 degrees Celsius. His parents called daily to inquire about his progress, but Dora spoke with them because Franz remained confined to his room. The money Kafka received from the social insurance institution, a 1,000 krona monthly pension, was insufficient to live on, so Dora, behind his back, wrote to his family and contacted them wherever she could for additional funds. A renowned Viennese pneumologist, urged by Dora, issued a written opinion that concluded, "Dr. Kafka's condition, caused by both his lung and larynx, is such that no specialist can help him, and the only thing that can be done is to relieve the pain by administering morphine or panopton." Dora, however, refused to believe this. She hoped that the warmth and sun would halt the process. The sanatorium offered virtually no treatment for the patient, so Robert Klopstock served as his physician, and Dora prepared soft meals that Franz could swallow. Kafka said the three of them formed his little family. At first, Kafka ate, joked, and refused to go to bed at night. But Dora was firm and, following the doctor's orders, put him in bed by 9:30 p.m. at the latest. They often talked about moving away and opening a restaurant in Tel Aviv, where Dora would cook and Franz would waiter and observe the people. He developed a taste for beer and wine. A bottle of Tokay was enough for him for a week. It probably had as soothing an effect on him as fresh air. Kafka decided he wanted to marry Dora, so he wrote a letter to her father asking for her hand in marriage, even though he wasn't a practicing Jew. Dora's father consulted a rabbi, who refused to consent to such a union. Franz was disappointed. Dora managed to bring in Professor Tjasna, who waived his fee to examine Franz. Although he stated that the condition of his larynx seemed to be improving slightly, his opinion and that of Klopstock coincided with Professor Hajek's diagnosis. Everyone agreed that Kafka shouldn't speak, as it put unnecessary strain on his larynx. Dora could no longer listen to Kafka's warm baritone. From then on, Kafka communicated through gestures and notes written on small conversational cards. Klopstock preserved about 100 such cards, which were later published in one of Kafka's letter collections. Franz slowly lost his appetite. Dora and Klopstock had to force food down him, and the pain in his throat added to the pain, making it difficult to persuade Kafka to eat. To spare his larynx, he didn't swallow his saliva. Instead, he spat it into the sink. From 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., Kafka lay on the balcony, breathing in the fresh air, which soothed his lungs. By the end of May, he had increasing difficulty swallowing, and Kafka often choked when drinking. However, he enjoyed watching others drink, and would ask them to drink in his presence so he could observe. "It's as if I were drinking myself," he wrote in a note. He was constantly thirsty, writing about drinking and thinking about it. "Why didn't I ever try beer in the hospital? Lemonade was available to everyone." His senses had become remarkably acute. He reacted to the slightest sound and smell. He was especially drawn to the scent of flowers. He asked them to bring them to his room and water them to prevent them from wilting. It turned out that Dr. Hoffman and his staff were unhappy that Dora and Franz were not married. Every few days, they would visit her, demanding that the couple get married, because the presence of an unmarried couple would negatively impact the sanatorium's image. Dora didn't even mention this to Kafka. Franz received proofs of The Hunger Artist for proofreading. He was angry that there were so many errors and struggled with the corrections. Dora noted that he sometimes cried after this exhausting work. The temperature exceeded 40 degrees Celsius. A few days before Kafka's death, Dr. Hoffman summoned Dora again, and with him sat the official from the Jewish community who was to officiate their marriage. Dora flatly refused, believing that Kafka would immediately suspect his condition was hopeless. On June 2nd, Franz was feeling quite well. Klopstock brought strawberries and cherries from Vienna, which Kafka sniffed long and passionately, savoring their aroma as if he knew it might be the last time. He was proofreading The Hunger Artist and writing a letter to his parents saying he was feeling a little better, but asking them to postpone their visit until he felt better and could have a beer with his father as they used to. He remembered the event fondly, as if he had forgiven his father for all the bad times of his past. Exhausted, however, he didn't finish the letter. Dora added the final greetings for him. She stayed with him until morning. On June 3rd, around 4 in the morning, she noticed that Franz was breathing increasingly heavily. She went to wake Klopstock to give him an injection. He recognized his friend's agonizing condition and called a doctor. The camphor injection, however, did little good. She applied ice to his throat, but that too was of little use. Kafka, with great effort, wrote one of his last notes to Dora. "Put your hand on my forehead. It will give me courage." Dora usually left the room when Franz received injections in his larynx, because she knew how painful they were and couldn't bear to watch. Klopstock sent Dora to the post office with Franz's letter to his parents, though she didn't want to leave him, feeling these were his final hours, but she went anyway. Kafka then asked Klopstock to give him a shot of morphine, which would end everything. He spoke despite the pain in his larynx. "Kill me, or you'll be a murderer." These are his last words, according to sources. He received the injection, but felt the dose was too low. According to Broad's notes, in his final moments, Kafka hallucinated that he saw his sister Ellie and told her not to approach her for fear of infection. He then lost consciousness and died shortly thereafter. There is also another version of Kafka's final moments, revealed many years later by a nurse named Anna, who was present in Kafka's room at the time. According to her, the dying Franz suddenly changed his mind and wanted Dora, who had gone to the post office, brought her to him. She carried a bouquet of flowers she had bought for Franz, which he let him smell. According to Anna's sister, Kafka opened his left eye and smelled the flowers. He reportedly smiled and collapsed onto the pillow. Moments later, he was dead, leaving Dora distraught. The cause of Kafka's death was cardiac arrest. Among the few possessions left of Kafka, Dora kept a fountain pen and an English hairbrush from G.B. Kent & Sons. In 1950, she traveled with that hairbrush to Israel and left it there. And so, a piece of Kafka finally reached the place he wanted to go. This is the only item Kafka left behind, besides his writings. It is currently kept at Kibbutz Ancharod in Israel. In her will, Dora Diamant wrote that she wished to be buried next to Kafka in Prague. This did not happen. She died in 1952 in England and was buried there. The last member of Kafka's petit small family, Robert Klopstock, died in 1972 in the USA. In 1928, Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin, a cure for tuberculosis, 4 years too late for Kafka. In the summer of 2025, I visited the former sanatorium building. It's now a residential building with apartments, where the Austrian Franz Kafka Association runs a small memorial room which can be visited on Saturdays by appointment. There, you'll see a small gallery of photographs of Franz Kafka and figures associated with him, as well as a presentation of his stay at the sanatorium. You'll see copies of documents from his stay, as well as the syringe he used for anesthetic injections into his larynx. All the boards have information in German. The room where Kafka stayed is located behind these walls. There's no access to it because tenants live there. However, from the adjacent balcony, you can peek at the balcony where Kafka rested and glimpse the forest that accompanied him in his final days. The sinks and staircase visible here have remained virtually unchanged since Franz Kafka's stay. Thank you for your attention, and see you soon.